So I just filmed an analysis of property in Reeves County. It was a property that one of y'all proposed I look at. I put out there in a live video that I wanted to start doing analysis on a public forum. You know, most of the stuff I do is for private clients and it's private information, and I'm not going to share y'all's private information. But if y'all give me permission to share it, then I would love to, because I think that it's a great learning experience to see what I go through and see what I'm looking at and share that with y'all. That's what this video is today. When I recorded it, it ended up being over 2 hours. And so y'all will see this little clock over here. That's what time it is when I'm recording, and I went way long. So instead of putting out a 2-hour video, I'm going to put out a couple smaller videos. Editing Tracy here. We have part 1, which was the Permian geology, the legal descriptions, and how to find the property. Part 2 ended up being what wells are on the acreage, how to find the wells, how to look up the permits, and how you know what the pay decimal is. Part 3 is the definition of the petroleum resource categories, and then how that is applied based on risking and percentages to value property, and then actually applying that to the property that we're looking at. Also included in part 3. Part 3 is a fun one. We have leasing and permits and rigs, 2 versus 3 mile laterals, and then also a review of the operator. And then part 4 is looking at the reservoirs and formations, taking it just layer by layer, faulting impacts, how well timing affects the value, parent-child effects, as they call it. Part 5 is the fun wrap-up that we were all looking forward to, and that's finding how it all comes together to make a value, explaining what a net royalty acre versus a net mineral acre is, what the fair market value of the property is estimated to be, just based on my rough ballpark. This is not an appraisal, a rant on comps, and then some PECAN tree updates. So it's a long one. I think it ended up being just over an hour once it was all edited down and condensed, but I think this is well worth it. So enjoy. Hi, my name is Tracy Lenz, and I'm the owner of PECAN Tree Oil and Gas and a petroleum engineer. I have a master's and an undergrad in petroleum engineering, and I'm also a certified mineral appraiser. There's different ranges of uncertainty for how certain we are to recover that amount of oil, because we can't see any of this, right? It's all underground. It's all based on science, how much is down there, but we can't actually go and count how many molecules of oil are down there. And then there's also a range of how commercial it is to produce. If you think of the extremes, you have a molecule on this side of the pipeline and it's actively flowing and just needs to flow to the sales point. That is as commercial as you can get in terms of getting it from point A to point B. Now, if you have that same molecule and that same sales point, but instead of being right there next to the sales point, where it just has to like go down one little pipeline, if instead it is underneath the Gulf of Mexico, 5 miles southeast of anything that's known, and you have to develop billions of dollars worth of structures in order to get to it. And then even still, you're not even sure if that molecule will be able to flow from where it currently is to all the places. That's extremely not commercial. That's a lot of money and risk and time that needs to be invested in order to get that molecule from point A to point B. The molecule that's very close to the sales point is worth more than the molecule that is that far away. So this is all just a means of putting that into terms. And so we have proved, probable, and possible reserves. So that is what reserves are, is things that are commercial, things that have known economics behind them, reliable methods of measuring, and reliable methods of evaluating. So there is no such thing as uneconomic reserves, because if it's uneconomic, it's not a reserve. Then it falls into the category of contingent reserves. So when you hear companies writing off reserves and things going from, you hear headlines of, oh, Shell had to write down this many reserves. Usually it's one of two things. Either prices changed and suddenly it's not economic to get that oil out of the ground, or the analysis changed and they realized that that molecule probably isn't there. And so they had to remove it from their list of reserves. Now, it still could be there. There's multiple different uncertainty ranges here. So you could say that it's no longer in my low estimate, but it is still in my high estimate. You have to be very sure that you're going to be able to produce that oil, and you have to be able to say, I have the money to do it. So if you don't have the money to do it, but you know the oil's there, it's not proved reserves. It's something else. And then within that, there's even subcategories of that. So we have, okay, well, it's proved and we justified to develop it, approved for development, and on production. So if we want to think of this in terms of things that actually make sense to what we're looking at as a mineral owner, justified for development might be, we'll go backwards. So on production is what you think it is. So it's a well that's producing. It's something that can go to the website, the Railroad Commission website, and see, okay, this well is actively producing. Approved for development might be more similar to if you see a permit that has been filed, but they haven't started drilling it yet. If a permit's been filed, that usually means that the company has it in their plan to go down the path of drilling the well. It doesn't guarantee that it's in their budget. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to drill it. But more likely than not, if there's a permit for it, that means that the ball is rolling, and for some reason or another, it's in the budget somehow. It's at least on their radar. And then justified for development could mean that maybe they haven't filed a permit for it yet. Maybe they haven't gotten the ball rolling. But based on everything presented, they can prove it's there, and they can show that it's in their 5-year plan to drill it. And then it can become approved reserve. Now, they still have to drill it within 5 years in order for it to stay approved. They can't just continue kicking the can down the road eternally. And that's another reason, people end up writing down reserves, is they just don't get to it in time. All of those things are just increasing ways that the market ends up discounting or risking the value that is projected to come out of that well. So keeping all that in mind, there's a standard way that you can take all of those risks and unknowns and combine them together into a single value. And the Society of Petroleum Evaluation Engineers is the society that kind of manages. They put out a lot of surveys and publications and training material on how to do this and how the market is doing it. So you can look at this economic survey as a summary of best practices that are actually being used in the market. Like if you were to go to a Wells Fargo or a Chase or someone and try to get a loan based on your oil and gas that you have underground, this is the type of analysis they would be putting on your minerals in order to come up with what they would loan to you or how much they think it's worth. So there's two things that we're going to look at. That's a risk-adjusted discount rate, and then there's a reserves adjustment factor. The risk adjustment rate, you can think of that as how soon do I expect to get this oil? The closer something is to commerciality, you can think of it as the sooner that molecule will become $1. So if something's already producing, that molecule will become $1 much sooner than if they haven't even filed a permit on it yet. This discount rate, you can think of as kind of like the reverse of an interest rate. Instead of getting money, you are losing money by waiting for it to come in. If you think of when you put money in a savings account, it has a 0.4% interest rate. By having the money there and waiting, you get that amount back. Now, the other way that the industry can adjust these numbers that they come up with is with the reserves adjustment factor. That one is just like a haircut to all the numbers, right? It's not taking into account how long it takes for the oil to get in or out. It's just saying, okay, well, if your discounted rate shows that this well is worth $500,000, if it's already producing, I'll take it at face value. But if it's not producing, if there's something in the way, I don't care what it is. I'm just going to take 20% off the top, and that's the new value. If it's not even drilled yet, if it's undeveloped, 50%. And then if it's not even drilled, it's not proved, there's something in the way of it becoming even approved reserve, I'm hardly going to value it at all. I'm going to take 75% or 90% or all of it off, depending on how risk adverse that buyer or investor is. These probable and possible reserves really are the thing that swings valuations quite a bit, because sometimes people don't want to value that risk at all. And sometimes they are willing to like kind of stretch their neck out and pay extra. And this is where that extra payment usually comes from. How much PUDs? One word for this is a PUD. So approved undeveloped. So all of that to say, the approved producing reserves are coming from that one Sivers South well. So if I look at that well, a production multiple is a rule of thumb that a lot of people use. Now there's official ways that you can get the value of production on a well, and that's usually decline curve analysis. But for this particular case, I'm going to use my rules of thumb. Based on the age and type of this well, I'll use a multiple of 41, looks like is what my model's putting out, which 41 months of production is what the value that well could be sold for, or that interest could be sold for. So for this well, that's estimating it at $3.7 million for the entire well. So for their portion of this well, we're looking at about $100,000. That 7.9 acres of this parcel is worth about $100,000 just because of this production here. But that's not all you need to look at. So a lot of the estimates out there will take your royalty production and just multiply it times a number and say, oh, your property is worth this much. But that would be dramatically incorrect here. And please do not do that. If you're in the Permian Basin or anywhere where there's active development, do not take your royalties and multiply it times some suggested number in order to come up with your property value, because I'm about to show you how wrong that would be. So let's stick with about $100,000 for the value. If you were to just do that, we'll approximate like about $100,000 of the value. And just for curiosity's sake, that means that the person is likely getting about $2,000 or $3,000 a month. Let's zoom out again, and we're going to start looking at some of the stuff going on around this property. These three things that I'm about to show on the map are the things that really drive value. So we're going to look at rigs, permits, and leasing. If this was an area where there wasn't as much drilling, then leasing would be more important, and that's why I pull it up. But because there's so much drilling in this area already, and there's so many wells already, the permits and rigs factor into it much more than the leasing. Leasing is in yellow, but we're kind of going to ignore that for now. The blue is the permits that are active as of right now. Remember, we have our property right here. So blue are all the permits that are filed, and black are where the rigs are. So that's where there's an actual drilling rig out there drilling new wells. And they're drilling likely those blue wells there. So one thing that this particular owner mentioned was that he thought that their acreage was not as interesting to the operator because they can only fit a 2-mile well as opposed to a 3. And then that the operator is currently drilling mostly 3-mile wells for economics. I do see that operator is doing that, but I don't think it's going to hurt the long-term value of them only able to have 2-mile laterals here, because almost everybody has a 2-mile lateral. And just from a technical side of it, I think the 3-mile laterals are really pushing the efficiency from the production side. Now, economically on the drilling side, it's easier because you're only having to drill one vertical section for 3 horizontal miles of well. You're only having one facility, but when you start having that molecule having to flow 3 miles in order to get just to the bottom of the wellbore and then still having to go up, you lose a lot of pressure efficiency and pressure just helping that molecule get to the surface. And so I'm watching the 3-mile laterals closely, but at this point in time, the most of the industry does 2-mile laterals, and they might end up coming back to 2-mile. I think the 3 miles was something that they were doing when prices were so slim, when profit margins were so slim, and every little bit helped. But when oil prices get more to a sustainable level, like above $80 a barrel, maximizing the recovery from the wells is more important than minimizing the cost of the wells, because it just makes so much of a difference getting 100,000 more barrels when it's $120 per barrel makes such an impact versus saving $1 million or $500,000 on the drill. So I think with prices staying high, the 2-mile lateral will be probably what people go back to, as opposed to trying the longer laterals. But that's just from my technical point of view. I mean, who knows what will actually happen? I mean, I bet people didn't expect there to be 2-mile laterals being the norm 20 years ago. Actually, when I was in college, 20 years ago, golly. No, wait, under 20 years. Okay, it's under 20 years. The rule that I was taught in my drilling courses was when someone proposes to drill a horizontal well, you need to question them why. And if there's any way you can not drill a horizontal well, you don't drill a horizontal well, because all the risks and everything and complexities are not usually worth it. And so I just think it's hilarious that now you get questioned, why aren't you drilling a horizontal well? Now, things change so quickly. Long story short, there's a lot of drilling and permits happening here. And even this is a 1 mile, just over a 1 mile section here. And who's doing this permit here? That's Diamondback. Diamondback is doing a 1 mile permit here. So Diamondback's a pretty big company. So for them to be doing 1 mile permits, it's got to be pretty gosh darn good economics, right? And that's not saying they're going to drill it, but I mean, it's not bad. When you have a unit that's formed there is a designated operator of that unit, and that is the main working interest owner, the main person who's responsible for operating the well, like sending a pumper out there to check on it, making any repairs, billing the other interest owners, sending out payments to the royalty owners. That's the person who's in charge of leading the operations, like leading the well. Whoever operates this lease is the person who gets to drill the remaining wells. Typically, now there's agreements that can be made, but typically if you have an operator that drilled one well and they are currently operating it, then they're the ones that need to budget and permit and do all the things to drill more wells. If Exxon's right next to you drilling up 18 wells per section, but your section's not operated by Exxon, it's operated by Chevron or something. It doesn't matter what Exxon's doing. You have to wait for Chevron to want to do that. For this example, we're looking at a well that is operated by Coterra. Coterra also used to be Cimarex. If we look at what Coterra is doing, so they're over here drilling just over 2 mile laterals. The state lookout unit over here. I don't know. I think that. From my point of view, that's roughly the same as this unit over here in terms of size. What it looks like they're doing is they're wanting to bulk develop all of these wells together, which is another way to do efficiency. I'm not concerned about this acreage getting developed by Coterra just because it's a 2 mile section versus a more than 2 mile. Let's just filter wells to Coterra. So we filtered the wells to Coterra, and then we'll also filter the rigs. Now these rigs are as of May 18th, so it's a little outdated as of right now, but it's close enough. And then we'll also do the permits because, you know, once something is leased, that really does matter what that person's doing. You know, I wonder what they're doing across the entire country. All right, so it looks like they have operations in Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, and then the Permian Basin, New Mexico, and Texas, and then kind of scattered wells around. All of those areas have rigs, so they're actively doing all of their basins. And then if we just zoom into the Permian Basin, looks like they're actively drilling Delaware. There's no Midland Basin activity or Central Basin Platform activity, so they're all doing unconventional. And then we have 4 different counties. So they're not like focusing on a certain area. It looks like they're being more strategic on developing certain prospects sooner. I don't think there's any reason to discount the value based on, you know, the company not having it in their plan or budget. I think this is just a matter of them working through their inventory. And then they obviously have some areas where they're more focused, such as this Culbertson acreage here, and then honestly, this patch here where the property is also a pretty big area. You know, a lot of this New Mexico stuff ends up being, it's high value acreage, but also some of that ends up being because there's federal permits that they need to drill before they expire. So it could be a little bit of each. But yeah, this is good that they have 2 rigs so close to each other because that means they're putting all their eggs in that basket. That's a lot of money being drilled right there when you start drilling multiple leases together like that. They're kind of going all in right there. I'm not seeing anything that's causing me to risk this abnormally or in the other direction. Like if all of their rigs are right around your acreage, it might be a positive effect. But I'm not seeing any reason to make it anything other than a neutral evaluation based on the operator. So now let's switch to looking at specific formations.